Hi everybody, today's lecture is on calcium. But before we start, I do want to talk about some of the basic concepts regarding minerals, just a general introduction. So minerals are found in the Earth's rock, soil, natural water sources, wells, and there's about 15 approximately, and it depends on your source and how you count them, that are considered essential. And we call them micronutrients versus macronutrients because we measure them in micrograms or milligrams. And of course, we measure macronutrients, carbohydrate, protein, fat, in terms of grams. Why are they necessary? Well, there's a number of reasons. I won't read them all, but they range anywhere from being a structural component in your tissue, blood clotting, acid-base balance, enzymes, hormones. There's a number of reasons we need minerals and they're necessary. Sources, kind of like protein, animal food sources are generally higher in minerals than the plant sources or plant foods. Processing often reduces mineral contents of a lot of foods. And in terms of bioavailability, it depends on the situation, I guess you could say. So minerals from animal foods are more easily absorbed than minerals from plant foods, which is what I alluded to. If you have iron from a meat source, that's more readily absorbed than the iron that you might find in your fortified cereal that you have in the morning. Sometimes there is competition between vitamins and minerals, or between minerals and minerals. Zinc and copper is a classic example. And fiber also binds minerals. So those are some general bioavailability issues we might look at when we recommend minerals for someone in their diet. Other sources of minerals: tap water, well water. Our well we happen to have an excessive amount of iron in our well, so we actually had to have a filtration system put in for two reasons. It destroys the appliances. It actually will corrode them, and it's awful on your skin and hair. My sister-in-law lives not too far from here, and they have the same type of soil and water source, and she has hemochromatosis, so it's imperative that there is a water filtration system to bind that excessive iron because she does have hemochromatosis. So hard water consists of a variety of minerals, which I've listed for you. My parents have well water as well. We're country folk, and there's excessive copper in it, and it actually stains the sink this teal green color. That's from the extra copper. They don't have a filtration system. Most public water supplies provide optimal fluoride levels because the mineral is actually added to the water. It doesn't occur naturally. Dietary supplements, of course, are sources of minerals. Some people take what I call a standard or general multivitamin mineral. It certainly won't hurt you, but when you start taking single doses of minerals, there can be a toxicity issue anytime you start taking them excessively. So let's start with calcium, or let's go back to calcium, I should say. Approximately 99% is found in your skeleton and your teeth. And then there's only 1% in extracellular fluid, so the fluid outside of the cells. Healthy adults only absorb about 25% of calcium. And during times of need, so pregnancy and infancy, that absorption rate actually increases to 60%. It's absorbed in the duodenum, upper part of the small intestine. You need a slightly acidic environment for that to happen, and you need vitamin D, which we have already talked about in the vitamin D lecture. And the amount in the body depends on the amount absorbed. So the more you need, the more you absorb. The less you need, the less you absorb. There are, again, there are small amounts found in multivitamin mineral supplements. You're not going to get a lot of calcium in a standard multivitamin mineral because the pill would be too large to swallow, quite frankly. There's two forms: calcium citrate, so we'll call that's Tums, and there's calcium carbonate, which is better absorbed. And there's a need to be careful with the calcium carbonate because it could be contaminated with lead or aluminum, especially if it comes from fossilized oyster shell. A while back, I recall that there was this big coral calcium craze. The best source of calcium was this very expensive coral calcium. Well, when I looked into it, I thought, well, what is this? I think I was a nutrition student at the time. All it is calcium carbonate. So people were paying through the nose, essentially, for Tums, and they were destroying the coral reefs. So it was a lose-lose, and that phase has gone by the wayside. So it's really important with some of these supplement well, there's some of these supplements that are marketed that you really do your research. Generally, my opinion is if some big pharmaceutical company is marketing a multivitamin mineral or a supplement, they have a lot to lose. So you're likely getting what you're supposed to get. But just remember, the FDA doesn't regulate any type of supplements. So buyer beware. Also, bone meal preparations may contain lead. So what impairs or what interferes with calcium absorption? If you have rapid intestinal motility, so if you have something like dumping syndrome, you eat a whole lot of fiber, don't take fiber pills with your calcium, please, if you want it absorbed. Excessive phosphorus, if you have a vitamin D deficiency, if you drink a lot of tea, so the tannins in the tea will interfere. Women going through menopause will have lower levels of estrogen, and just in general, the aging process leads to decreased calcium absorption. How is calcium transported? Well, it's bound to proteins, albumin, prealbumin, and globulins. There is a complex that occurs with sulfate, phosphate, citrate, or bicarbonate. It's found free in the blood. We do measure a serum calcium. Often in people who have metastatic bone cancer, so a cancer that has spread to the bone, for instance, those men with prostate cancer, it tends to metastasize to a secondary location to the bone. They'll have hypercalcemia because the tumor is actually destroying the bone and their calcium levels will go up. Protein-bound calcium will always be, or usually is in equilibrium with ionized calcium. So how do you regulate calcium? Because again, you don't want to be hypercalcemic. It's maintain or have low levels of calcium because you'll have issues with cardiac and skeletal muscles. Blood levels maintained at the price of bone. So bone basically is your bank for your calcium. If you've got some extra calcium, you'll store it in the bank of bone. And if you need some, you're going to kind of rob the bank to increase those serum calcium levels. Even if you have inadequate calcium intake, you're going to rob the bank, rob bones for the calcium. And that's obviously going to set the stage for things like osteoporosis, fractures. Why is calcium necessary? Well, there's a number of functions. Obviously, I've just been talking about bone. You want to have nice teeth, muscle contraction, clot formation, believe it or not, nerve impulse transmission, cell metabolism. And there hasn't been a lot of talk about this lately, but at one time they were talking about calcium in a role in lowering blood pressure and also in immune function. So let's talk about the thyroid and parathyroid related to calcium homeostasis. The thyroid gland, which is that butterfly gland in your neck, secretes calcitonin when your blood calcium levels become too high. So that in turn stimulates a cell called an osteoblast. And so calcitonin is going to stimulate osteoblasts, which are going to build bone. So they're going to pull that calcium out of the blood and actually create more bone. Reverse happens when the parathyroid secretes PTH. When blood calcium is too low, osteoclasts are going to destroy some bone, pull it out of the bank, and increase those serum calcium levels. Other roles of calcium, we talked about blood pressure, may reduce colon cancer or PMS, may lower blood cholesterol, not so sure about that, may reduce kidney stones, and it can cause kidney stones as well, so that's interesting. Bind competitively with lead, which would be great to reduce absorption. And for a while, there was talk or a lot of attention on calcium related to promoting weight loss. Food sources, pretty much everyone's familiar with, I think. Dairy sources are rich in calcium. There's that fortified orange juice that I like to drink that has calcium in it. Salmon with bones. I never could get over eating bones. I just can't do it. Sardines with bones. No, thank you. Tofu. Sorry, I'm letting my personal food preferences into the lecture, just sharing my thoughts. Just my opinion. Daily value is 1,000 milligrams per day. Adequate intake, depending on the age range and the disease process that you may have going on, or the therapeutic needs, I should say, 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams a day. Average intake, they say, for women is 800 milligrams a day, and for men, 1,000. If you're going to take calcium pills, do not take the total dose for the day at one time. Best to take them around mealtime, and we really don't absorb more than 500 to 600 milligrams of calcium at one sitting at a time. So don't take 1,200 milligrams of calcium at once. You want to divide it into two 600 doses, or if you're taking 1,000, divide it into two 500 milligram doses. Toxicity. So the upper level of toxicity is 2,500 milligrams per day. Please don't go anywhere near that. you can get hypercalcemia. Yeah, signs and symptoms: kidney stones, bone pain, muscle weakness, fatigue, pretty vague, hypertension. We're going to transition to how we build higher bone mass. Apologize, lost my thought for a second. Adequate diet, healthy body weight. Thinner people have less dense bones. The more weight you carry, the more resilient your bones are. And people that exercise have greater bone density than those that don't. Normal menses, you need that estrogen factor, weight-bearing physical activity. Moderate intakes of protein, phosphorus, sodium, and caffeine. You don't want to bind and excrete that calcium. Smokers have lower bone density than non-smokers. There's certain medications that interfere with calcium absorption, and they believe that peak bone mass is achieved between the ages of 16 and 25. So if you don't attain that peak bone mass, your ship has kind of sailed. There are things to do to prevent loss, but that peak mass is attained in that age range, which is fairly narrow in my opinion. Bone loss begins at the age of 30. As I like to say, I'm 29 forever, so not quite there yet. Bone development and maintenance, they're constantly remodeled in response to physical stress. They're a living organism. People, I think, picture bones as that Halloween skeleton. It's not a living thing. It's a dead thing. It's not. It's living tissue, and it's constantly being remodeled, broken down, and built up again. Osteoclasts, I mentioned, tear down bone when it's not needed or where it's not needed, or if the serum calcium is low. And it's osteoblasts add to bone when the serum calcium is high. What's osteoporosis? It's a disease characterized by low bone mass and reduced bone structure, and it increases the risk of bone fractures. The running, it's not a joke, it's very serious. The running thought is the elderly woman's hip breaks and then she falls. Hip fracture in an elderly woman is a very bad thing. Often the outcomes are not good. So what I'm trying to say is, you have these folks, these elderly people have the osteoporosis and their bone breaks, and that causes them to fall before they, it's not the fall that causes the fracture, it's the fracture that causes the fall. It's the reverse. Among people over age 50, there's about 10 million. That's a lot of people that have osteoporosis, and another 34 million who are at risk. An estimated 1.5 million Americans have an osteoporosis-related fracture each year. That's pretty significant. That concludes my lecture on osteoporosis. I will see you again.